Sean is director of True Group. True has facilities and operations across both Singapore and also Taiwan. Most recently, Sean has been made the first president of the Singapore Fitness Alliance, the new non-profit industry body here in Singapore that galvanizes and promotes commercial fitness across the world. Sean, great to have you with us, Hal.
Thanks, Ross.
We're going to touch on a range of subjects, ladies and gentlemen. The first one I wanted to bring up was collaboration, which only 2 or 3 years ago, Sean, might seem alien to so many people, but now we're starting to see collaboration as mainstream, in fact, as essential to the future of any fitness business. How do you think collaboration has come together so well, and how do you think it will work in the future?
Well, actually, Ross, a few years ago, the first time I had heard about collaboration was at the Fit Summit, and you were speaking about it, and you were telling everybody that we should embrace that. And I must say, the industry was a little bit slow to take that on, and that's one of the things I think that COVID has accelerated. But certainly today, I do believe that has brought about a very healthy environment. We are talking a lot more to each other. To be honest, I never thought that I could sit across the table, with my competitors. We share a beer, we share our pains, we share our challenges, we share our wins as well. But it's been fantastic, and across the world, I've seen groups come together, and you're talking about all things to do with COVID. So it's not only about the challenges we face, about how what are the best practices for cleaning, for disinfecting, about how we also engage with members. How do we keep and retain our members? How do we keep them engaged during this period of time if we're in lockdown? And more importantly, I think for us, is how we also come together, how we talk about engagement with governments. I think that has been very, very key to how the industry has evolved. And now we've seen industry bodies across the world, so international bodies, regional bodies, we've seen local bodies. So the Singapore Fitness Alliance is one of them. It was set up, as you know, you co-founded it. We set that up in January of this year. But that was to meet a need because we felt that as an industry, we've always, I think, lacked a collective voice. We haven't maybe articulated our position very well to governments. And I think we felt the need that we needed to do something about it. So that whole collaborative effort, I think it's a very wide definition. It's not necessarily the case where somebody sits down and we just do business together, we do a joint venture or something like that. It's collaboration by sharing information, sharing goals, aspirations, and direction of where we want to be going.
Now let's look at the last 12 months. Businesses have weathered the storm, some better than others, but I think what everyone has been doing in the past 12 to 15 months is understanding how they can future-proof their businesses. There's been a lot of measures put in place. Obviously, you're doing that at True Group, but you're talking with a number of other operators who are also future-proofing their business. What are you seeing as some of the ways that they are future-proofing their business? What's been successful, and how are True Group doing it?
Well, let's just talk about perhaps the industry here in general. If we're talking about future-proofing the industry for the future, I think the one thing that we need to do is continue to collaborate. We need to continue talking to each other. We need to continue attending events like this, which help us to, I guess, keep our fingers on the pulse of what is going on, not just in our countries, but around the region, around the world, so we know what is to come. I think that is very, very important. We need to work on how we continue to engage with governments. I think this is a very, very important item on the agenda for the SFA, the Singapore Fitness Alliance. We've got to remember, not just here in Singapore, but across the world and wherever you may be, that we shouldn't just be focused on this just for the period of lockdown. We tend to be very active, especially when we're locked down and we say, oh, we should be lobbying the government to allow us to reopen a little bit sooner. What about financial help, support packages, so on and so forth. But the effort has to carry on after the lockdown, and we've got to remember that and to stay focused, because it's going to be a very long conversation. So that, as I think as an industry, we've got to do. For the individual businesses, I think it's important that we understand what our space in our industry is. As you know, we've got so many different modalities, within that fitness and wellness space, and it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So we really have to understand what our core competency is, what is our offering. We've heard a lot of the speakers today talk about, technology, connected tech, all of that. We need to understand for ourselves, is our business able to embrace that? In how can we leverage on that? For some of the businesses in the sector, we might be able to embrace tech in a bigger way. But for others, no, it's still very low tech. It's still very much brick and mortar. Perhaps the entire ambit of tech for them is just a booking system and a reservation system or payment system. But I think they need to understand that. But I think future-proofing for many of these businesses is just to understand where they are and to try to predict and to foresee how long this pandemic is going to last and how to last until that period of time.
Yeah. Now, one of the key things about future-proofing your business is not only about what your business offers, it's about what you as a business leader can bring to the table, Sean. We've heard resilience being talked about for the last 12 months. It is such an important skill set or such an important character to have now as a business leader. Resiliency aside, what other characteristics, what skill sets do you think that business leaders need to have in order to get through this pandemic and lead their companies to growth?
I've been asked this a few times, and the analogy I like to draw is this. As leaders, we're put in that position, and there is a difference, in my opinion, between a wartime chief and a peacetime chief. And you bring very different skill sets to the table depending on that situation. In a time of peace, where and if I draw a comparison to our business, all we're talking about is ups and downs of the business, whether or not you've got more members coming in, do I have to deal with a competitor opening a gym down the street, how do I deal with that, right? It's an easier set of problems to deal with, and one that I guess experience, our expertise, and maybe for some of us business school will teach you how to deal with. But when you talk about a situation which nobody in our lifetime has encountered before, it's analogous to being at war. And what do you then bring to the table? What are your skill sets that you can bring? For me, definitely resilience, but you need to be able to be decisive and to make those hard decisions. Because in times like these, actually, nobody else around you knows the answer. And they're all looking to you because you are in that leadership position. Your decision may not be right. When you look at it, in retrospect, it might not have been the right decision, but somebody needs to make that decision. And if you are in that leadership role, you need to make it. So it's well and good if you want to sort of stay back and say, I'll let others, take the lead and to make the mistakes. But for me, if you want to be an effective leader at this point in time, you need to step up. You need to show that you're in control of the situation, but at the same time, be absolutely candid. There's no weakness, in being able to show that, look, underneath here, I've got no armor. I do not know what the next 10 steps are going to bring me, but I'm going to lead. I'm going to take you forward, and together we'll see where that brings us.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We interview a lot of executives, and there are a number of executives now that are showing that vulnerability. They are showing that actually we don't quite have an idea, but what they do have is decisiveness. They have a plan of action and they're following it. And so I think that's a really interesting point, Sean. Let's turn the spotlight on True Group. Of course, you've got operations in Singapore, operations in Taiwan. They have been affected in very different ways throughout the pandemic. A quick update on both businesses and perhaps some of the insights that you can pull from the last few months from each.
Sure. Let me start with Singapore. In Singapore, when the pandemic hit, we were shut down. So gyms and wellness businesses, we were shut down for 2.5 months. The entire country went into lockdown last year from about April to about June. But we reopened. But during the lockdown, I think everybody, as we know, all around the world, we were rushing in to get our online offerings to our members. We were on the rise, and I think we were starting to build up the business again. And then, unfortunately, very recently, on the 8th of May, gyms and studios actually faced another shutdown. Wasn't a complete 100% shutdown, a partial shutdown that only allowed us to conduct indoor classes. And those indoor classes had to be masked up, and you had to be low intensity with no use of equipment. But outdoors, you were allowed to do practically anything. You could do group exercises outdoors. You could do one-on-one personal training. You could do high intensity with all equipment and masks off. So for a brief period of time, I think we enjoyed that. And interestingly, we saw our online viewership for group classes really take off. And this was in a much bigger way compared to the first lockdown that we had last year. But before we could run any sort of detailed analytics on why that was the case, we were hit by a second announcement, as you know, Ross. So that has basically restricted us again. So the government basically had a concern about a spike in COVID cases attributed to what is commonly known as the Indian variant. They were concerned with that, and therefore the restrictions were that for outdoor activities, high intensity, group activities, all had to be masked up. Low intensity as well. So the only exception to a high intensity workout outdoors was if you were doing it one-on-one with a trainer, and the trainer had to remain masked, and you could be unmasked. So that has caused our online viewership for classes to drop. It remains to be seen, but this second lockdown, which they call a phase 2 heightened alert, is going to last until the 13th of June. It's been, to be honest, a bit of a downer. We worked so hard to try to rebuild the businesses. And now we've seen that the rug has been pulled out from under our feet. We probably have to rebuild again. We are better prepared to take some of our offerings online, of course. But as we well know from anecdotal evidence from all around the world, the online revenue in no way supplements or makes up for any of that lost revenue. So Singapore, we're still suffering. It's still a very challenging environment. But what has been encouraging is the government has been very quick to come forth with the first round of financial support. It's not quite what we expected, to be honest, as the industry. And this is what we would say in comparison to what the industry got last year when we were shut down. However, there's hope yet. I hold hope for the fact that the government will still come back with a second round of measures or a better package. And that's something which we as the industry body will hope to continue communications with the government on. Now, switching over to Taiwan, had this event taken place a week ago, I would tell you it's all about rosy skies and great stories, because Taiwan has been, until last weekend, I believe the only country in the world which did not have any lockdowns for gyms and studios. But unfortunately, over the last few days, there has been a rise of cases again. Again, also attributed to the Indian variant, untraced and unlinked cases that has caused quite some concern to the Taiwanese authorities. As a result, gyms and studios have been shut down for 2 weeks. So that would come to a close at the end of May. Yeah. I wish I had better news, but I guess the silver lining for our clubs in Taiwan has been that there was lots of experience for them to draw on. I mean, we had SOPs which we had from Singapore that we could just port over, so the Taiwanese team knew exactly what to do, and they were ready for it. But let's just hope for Taiwan, the lockdown there does not extend beyond the 28th of May.
Yeah, it's a very crucial few weeks ahead here in Asia, as a lot of countries actually come out of this lockdown. It'll be very interesting to see what happens, Sean. Let's have a look at innovation. I mean, True Group does have a large number of big box facilities. You've no doubt taken the last few months, I suppose, to try and understand how you can innovate those properties, how you can innovate those spaces, to make them more applicable, make them more affordable, make them more economical in tomorrow's marketplace. How do you think big boxes are now looking at their facilities and understanding how they can redesign, remodel, reevaluate them?
Well, that's, it's a difficult question. I think the problem for big box gyms, and I'll give the example in Singapore is this. We have made investments. Our costs are sunk. And so we've signed on, long leases for large spaces. Yeah. That's the model. And it is sort of like a volume model where each one of us has thousands of members at one particular location. And these locations are typically in central business districts or close to shopping malls, etc. But with whatever has happened, I think that has put a lot of challenges on the business model. And on the other side, you've got landlords who will be holding you on to those long leases. If they're mandated by law or cajoled by government to give you a little bit of help, they will. But other than that, going to them and negotiating, as many of my contemporaries will know, it's like pulling teeth, and it is difficult. So, and against this backdrop of us not knowing how long the pandemic is going to last for, and how long the governments are going to take somewhat conservative views, and knowing where we as an industry sit in the eyes of the government in terms of risk, I think we have to look at restructuring the business model. I think that is something that we will see from the big box operators. I think we've spent the last year trying to figure out if the online version was going to be the solution and the savior to us all. We all know that's not going to be it. Yeah. Your online offerings are only going to supplement what you have in terms of brick and mortar. It may well be that we've got to look at how we bring in, if we're not allowed to exit some of our leases and right-size some of our clubs, then how do we bring in complementary concepts into some of our spaces? So we either do a sublease, or we ourselves have to evolve and come up with different concepts to try to bring in a different demographic, a different group of people into that space. I think it's a work in progress, Russ. It's going to be tough. I was playing around with the possibility. This is something which Equinox has also talked about, what they call a tribrid model, which is indoor, digital, and outdoor. So is that how the big boxes will evolve, where as part of your offerings you might be looking at permanent outdoor spaces? Right now, many of us are, in Singapore, for example, we're looking at outdoor spaces on a temporary basis because we've been in sort of like a partial lockdown. But is the future of a big box also to look at some outdoor space? Yeah. That could be an interesting way that the industry will go as well.
Let's look at, I suppose, facilities in the CBD, in the heart of cities, Sean. Like you just said, you've got already sunken investments in some facilities, but when you're looking at potential new locations, obviously there's a myriad of choices. Do you think that CBD locations will be unfavourable now or unwelcome given today's marketplace? How do you think that investors will now look at people that are wanting to go into the CBD at a large degree?
Let me put it in a different way, Ross. I think the reality is, for most of us in the fitness business, our clubs, our locations are not destinations of choice. How we have chosen our locations and how we've set up is to cater for the demographics around us. So we look at business areas, central business districts, because you've got a very heavy concentration of office workers there.
Yeah.
And that's where you set up. Or you look at shopping malls because you've got shoppers there. But we haven't been really, in the context of Singapore, we haven't really set up in high density housing areas in the suburban areas. Not really. So if we look and we listen to what, for example, the big tenants in the CBDs are saying, the banks, the MNCs, and they're all saying it's going to be work from home. We're going to be cutting down and downsizing our space, and they're going to be moving, away from central business district areas. Faced with that, I think it would be foolish for us in the future to try to swim against the tide. Yeah. So we would be looking to see where the trends are going. So we might, for the time being, just be sitting out and writing out the ends of our leases. If we can negotiate with landlords on how to exit some of the leases, I'm sure some of us would, or downsizing. But I also will put my money on many of us looking to set up in suburban areas. So the CBDs, I think we'll see some change in the way the CBDs form. But in the meantime, I think we will react fast and we'll move out to some of the other areas.
Let's stick on the theme of trends. Whether you're a trend setter or a trend follower, Asia has been for a number of years the last one to jump on the bandwagon of many trends that have started in the US and have come over east across Europe and eventually landed in Asia. Where do you think Asia can actually lead trends going forward and coming out of this pandemic?
I've seen some very interesting trends which are starting about in Asia, right? But let me put it in this way. We might have been a follower, but some of the cities in Asia have been fast followers. If I take a step out of the fitness industry, the fastest follower in the world used to be China. And look where they are now. They're leading the pack. So certainly Asia, I think, has the ability, right? Has the ability to lead. But in what areas? I think it's interesting to see. I mean, we know places like Singapore, but Hong Kong, for some of the Western brands that have come, they like to test bed their concepts in Singapore and Hong Kong. They realize that if you can thrive and survive in a country where you've got high rents, but at the same time you've got a young demographic that likes to exercise and work out, and which will embrace tech, I think you've got a chance at succeeding in the rest of Asia. I think where Asia can lead, if you ask me, it's in the area of technology, of how you can embrace and connect technology to what we do as an industry. That's one aspect of it. But there is a different aspect to this also when you talk about leading trends. I think we're going to see something in the next few years from the developing countries in Asia. And technology has brought that about. And I'll explain. More than ever, I think everybody is tuned to social media and is plugged in to the internet. There are many countries where the young are coming up and they're looking at fitness trends around the world, the body beautiful and everything else. Many of these countries, the people grew up having aspirations. And I think to feed those aspirations, we are going to see actually an explosion of fitness in some of these countries, which are still developing, in the Vietnams, in the Cambodias, in the Indias, once we're done with the pandemic. So that technology will be an enabler, but not because the gyms that will rise up or emerge are going to be technology forward, but only because that was a means to bring the realization that they wanted to aspire to what the Western world or more developed cities were doing. So I think we're going to see that as a trend. So it's not necessarily the case where if you want to ride that wave in Asia, you've got to do something where you are the most tech forward. It could be still bricks and mortar, but I think the market is going to be huge.
Good. Two quick fire questions, Sean. We've got one in from the audience here.
Sure.
What advice would you give to fitness businesses who want to start their own industry associations in their respective regions? 30 seconds if you can. What advice?
I think the first thing you want to do is for a quick win, you identify your main players in that particular market. You sit them down and make sure all of you can identify, I think, a common denominator. What's going to unite all of you, and how do you want to bring your case forward? Once the bigger players in the country are on board, the smaller ones will get on board. And then you need to also find a supporter in the government who's got good links with the government to be able to help you petition your case forward.
Great advice. Last question, ladies and gentlemen, with Sean. What companies, large, medium or small, have impressed you throughout the pandemic for their innovation?
I'll name one, Ross. It's actually a yoga movement. I spent a bit of time with Pete, and I've seen how they've, for want of a better word, pivoted, and they put their yoga classes online. They have had a great app. So they spent their time in lockdown in a great way. They launched a version 2 of the app early this year. They opened their flagship store in the middle of Orchard Road in February this year. This is just coming out of what was, for most people, a crappy, 2020. But they did very well in 2020. But what was very, very impressive was that they put their classes online. They didn't give the classes out for free. They didn't even discount their classes. Their online classes are exactly the same price as their physical classes, and people are paying for that. That's amazing. So the brand equity they're following has been exemplary. So, yeah. Pete owes me a beer after this.
Well, if you don't know True Group, ladies and gentlemen, or if you don't know Yoga Movement, by all means, please look them up. I know that both the teams are online for the event. Sean, as always, thank you, my friend. Very much appreciated that. Sean has been an absolute stalwart of the industry for the last 12 months, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to interview him. We'll close off this session just now, and I'm going to bring on another friend, Andrea Bell, from Inspire Brands, who look over Anytime Fitness Asia. Sean, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you in the next session.
Thanks, Russ.
Everybody.